Hello, Fearless Gamers! Matt here for Fearless Games, and today I'm doing another entry into the Book Corner series, with today's book being The Descent of Angels by Mitchel Scanlon. Now, for those who aren't aware, I am a huge fan of the Eldar and the Dark Angels. They are my two favorite armies in this game. The Dark Angels were my first Space Marine army, and the Eldar were the first army I ever played. So naturally, I would be very interested in reading stuff involving them over any other series out there. And so I picked up The Descent of Angels because I couldn't get a copy of The Angels of Darkness, which is by far the most popular Dark Angels novel, and it's actually written by the author who wrote the Path of the Eldar series. I decided to not go out and get that book mainly because one of my friends brought up an interesting point. It is about the fall, which has been told a dozen times. Whereas this book is not about the fall at all. It's the story of one of the members of the Fallen, but before he actually becomes a Fallen. And it actually goes through before the Emperor reaches Caliban, to when the Emperor gets onto Caliban, and a small section of the Dark Angels in the their contribution in the Dark Crusade. Or, however, the Great Crusade, sorry. I don't know. I think I was just playing the Dark Crusade game, so I kind of got that stuck in my head. So it's basically about this character named Zariel, who has joined the Order, a section of knights on Caliban, one of many different sects. This sect is only known as the Order. And it's actually the knightly order that Lion El Jonson and Luthor are a part of. And he's joined the order to become a knight, and because it's the only order that allows any type of nobility or non-nobility into their ranks. And it's him being trained to be a knight during the height of what was known as the Crusade against the Great Beasts, these nasty monsters that live on Caliban. Because Caliban is just this horrible nightmare of a planet to live on. And Lion El Jonson and Luthor have decided that they're going to wipe out the greatest threat on the planet, which are the Great Beasts. And so this character is indoctrinated into the Order during the Crusade against the Great Beasts, and it's the story of him playing his part in that crusade. It also then talks about what happened when the Emperor descended to Caliban and reunited with Lion El Jonson, and the First Legion was brought to the planet, and the knightly order that Lion El Jonson was a part of gets indoctrinated into it. So you're basically getting a neutral point of view of one of the characters and the order that Lion El Jonson is a part of, and how Lion El Jonson was depicted by pretty much the average person in the order. You also then got to see the same person's perspective of the indoctrination into the Imperium, and how you got a mindset of how people were feeling about the changes that were happening on Caliban because of this, and then you got to see a participation in the Great Crusade with the Dark Angels. And it's actually really cool. You get a nice look at Luthor and Lion El Jonson, which they do not get painted in any light anyway. They don't look, neither of them are looked at as amazing heroes, and none of them are looked at as terrible villains. They're kind of looked at on neutral ground, where you can get equal parts of either, so you can then decide if you think that Luthor was in the right or Lion El Jonson was in the right when the whole fall happened. So it's actually a really nice depiction of that. The only reason I assume that the character in this does eventually become one of the Fallen is because of the prologue in the beginning, which is a Fallen. It seems like he's talking to either a member of the Dark Angels or an interrogator chaplain. They really don't depict. So from that I concluded that, okay, this is a story of a member of the Fallen beforehand. And so, unlike the Path of the Eldar series, this one is actually probably a really good book to get someone started in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, because you get to see a planet before the Imperium arrived and after the Imperium arrived. So you got to see what planets were like and how some people kind of felt about this whole expansion from Terra onto the other planets. And you also kind of got a little bit of history of how these planets got, populated, and why the Emperor basically went and said, I'm going to unite them. So it kind of makes a little bit more sense on that front. story-based wise, it's actually really well written. And this is coming from someone who isn't really well read, and so there was never actually any time in the book where I had to go out and look up any of the vocabulary used in the book to understand what's going on. The book is written in such a way that any type of reading level can enjoy it without being confused or feeling, talked down to. Anything bad in it? There was one part in it that I was like, I thought it could have been done differently and still be just as powerful, but I can understand why it was done the way it was. So I didn't have any really bad thing to say about it, but there was one part that I was just like, but all in all, it's actually pretty interesting. There was really one cool thing in this book that I think should be put into the new Dark Angels, the new Dark Angels Codex. That's nothing really major. They mentioned this thing called, this ability called Terror Sight. The ability to see through the presence of people through the warp and kind of put yourself in that halfway space where you're not part of the physical plane, but you're not part of the warp type of thing. And I think it would be a really cool power to give the Dark Angels in the new Codex. You also get to see, get a little bit more insight on certain particular characters, well, certain particular models in the Dark Angels army that they really never talk about. They're mentioned briefly in the Angels of Darkness, the Angels of Death Codex, and then they're partly mentioned in this codex and what they're actually part of. But other than that, they're never really talked about. So you got a really neat, hint into what these particular characters, and kind of makes them a little bit more interesting than they were before. Like I said, I fell in love with this book. It was a great read, and there wasn't really anything bad about it that I could really think of. The story is very engaging, and like I said, you get a really nice insight to, life before the Imperium, life during the Imperium, and how people on different worlds would perceive this kind of expansion and reunition. So, all in all, it is a great book. If you're a big fan of the Dark Angels, this is a great book to take up. If you don't know much about the Dark Angels, this is a great introduction by far, because you get they were the Dark Angels, and then while they were the Dark Angels. So if you just heard about them but you never really learned anything about them, this is a great source to learn more about the chapter itself. It's still available I got this at Barnes & Nobles. You can pick this up off the Games Workshop website as well. And like I said, give it a shot. It's really great, especially for those who are sick and tired of just reading stories about the fall. So that's all for today, Fearless Gamers. So until next time, take care.